All right, hello everyone, and welcome in. It's time for this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. We're going to be looking back at the history from the week of May 25th. As always, I'm Jeff Klein, and as always, I'm welcoming in my good friend Clayton Hamilton. How you doing, Clayton?
I'm doing great. It has been a pretty jam-packed week with
Oh
the
yeah,
French Open and the beginning of the College World Series regionals. Full slate of Major League Baseball, and the NBA Finals are now set. The Stanley Cup Finals are set. So, whew, big weekend.
yeah, yeah. It was. It's just always such a great time of the year. Well, we had Memorial Day at the beginning of the week, which is sort of the unofficial beginning of summer. So, as you mentioned, baseball. We got a lot of baseball we're going to talk about on the show. You talked about NBA, you mentioned that. We're going to get into some NBA. We also have some track and field and racing. But before we get into all that history, I know you enough to know you.
Yeah.
And I'm ready for my Giro d'Italia update.
The final Giro d'Italia update as the race concluded today on the streets of the Eternal City in Rome. And it was Jonathan Milan from Lidl Trek who had gotten his butt kicked in all of the sprints by Paul Magnier, the Frenchman. But Jonathan Milan turned the tables for Italy, wins on the streets of Rome in stage 21. And Jonas Vingegaard of Visma Lisa Bike in Denmark wins the Giro, the overall title, the general classification. And he has now won all three of the Grand Tours. And he said he's coming at you, Tadej Pogacar, in the Tour de France, which is going to be a tough double. Winning the Giro and the Tour de France is a very tough double to do in the same year because he's only got the month of June to recuperate from a long 3-week bike ride to go into another 3-week bike ride in the even more hills and mountains in the Tour de France. So we'll see if he can make it.
Yeah, there's got to be a pretty short list of riders who've won both back to back. Just the amount of endurance and recovery you need to be competitive in the Tour de France right after the Giro.
And it's hard, and it should be hard. It's like winning the Triple Crown in horse racing. People always say, well, it's too hard, it's too hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult, and that's why you don't see a lot of horses be able to make the Triple Crown, and you certainly don't see a lot of riders that even attempt to ride all three Grand Tours in 1 year. But congratulations to Jonas Vingegaard for winning all three Grand Tours in his career.
What did Tom Hanks say in A League of Their Own? If it was easy, everybody would do it.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Right. All right, well, we could probably spend an entire show talking about this last week of sports.
Yeah, just don't talk about UCLA today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to go there.
Yeah, UCLA blows the save in the bottom of the ninth. They get walked off in the 10th by St. Mary's, the Gales from Moraga, who beat them twice in this tournament. And now UCLA, the number one overall seed, attempting to go number one wire to wire, is out. But I would say this to anybody who has not yet given college baseball a chance, and you will have some games tomorrow that are elimination games that will determine the Super Regionals next weekend and the College World Series the week after that. And you're like, I don't know if I want to watch college baseball. I want to watch Major League Baseball. There is no difference between college baseball and Major League Baseball, Jeff, because the bullpen in college can't get anybody out, just like the bullpen in Major League Baseball can't get anybody out.
I was waiting to hear where you were going with this because I was about to say, well, there is a difference. It's aluminum bats, but
now the difference is if you got to lead in the seventh, you might as well not, because nobody in the bullpen can get anyone out. Just like Major League Baseball, every day you watch Major League Baseball, you watch the game change 7, 8, 9. College baseball, same thing, 7, 8, 9, always.
Well, and I think what is also similar in college and pros is, and UCLA was a victim of this. They kept getting down and they kept relying on these ninth inning comebacks. How many games in a row did you and I sort of be texting each other and saying, UCLA is going to lose? They walk it off. They pull off a big win. And I what did I tell you just a few days ago? they can't keep doing this. You can't keep
You can't keep doing it. But one of the exciting things is from here on out, with, I said, elimination games tomorrow and best 2 out of 3 next weekend, and then a double elimination in the final. Every game has a game 6, game 7 feel to it. So it's knockout, win or go home. So you see a lot of guys not thinking about tomorrow, just thinking about today. So it is pretty exciting baseball. If you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah, it is really exciting. It's just the athletes involved are just how exciting they are and how much they put into the game. And it's not always the cleanest because it is college, but it is some exciting television and it's riveting. And sometimes the number 1 seed gets knocked out, but it's exciting nonetheless. Yep. All right, well, on that note, let's jump into some other baseball. And we're going to go back to 1993.
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to talking about this topic with you because it's about Dale Murphy, and you and I have had many, many conversations. Nice, I like it. Yes, Rockies and Braves. And so on May 27th, 1993, Dale Murphy wound down his career and retired. He was playing on the Rockies at that time. He left the baseball behind. He was 2 home runs shy of 400. He had over 1,200 RBIs, and he had a career 815 OPS. And I think a lot of people are surprised to find out that he was the only player outside of Mike Schmidt who had... Only Mike Schmidt had more home runs than Dale Murphy in the 1980s, and he was tied with Mike Schmidt actually for RBIs by a National League player through that decade as well. So sometimes he's underrated because he's not in the Hall of Fame, but should he be in the Hall of Fame?
Sometimes he's overrated. He is overrated every single day, Jeff. I'm sorry, underrated. You're right. Yes. Underrated. Every single day. Underrated. There are 3 crimes in baseball, Jeff. There are 3 absolute felony crimes. Is there anything worse than a felony? Is there a higher crime than a felony? Because if there is, it has been committed by Major League Baseball on 3 counts. Count one crime that Major League Baseball has done, right? Is that you cannot buy a ticket at the stadium the day of the game without using an app. You can't just go to the box office and buy a ticket. Crime number 1. Crime number 2 is that they are stealing from every single person that goes to a game by having the audacity and the arrogance to charge you to park your car at the stadium. That is a crime, Jeff. It's a crime at a casino. It's a crime at a mall. It's a crime at a theater. It is a crime anywhere that you have a business where you want people to come and you charge them to park. That is a crime. And the 3rd crime is that Dale Murphy is not in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not sure I would say it's a crime, but I don't know if I'm that passionate about it, but I do think he should be in the Hall. I kind of do see the argument of why he's been kept out, but I think if I had to vote, I would vote him in. He'd be on sort of that fence that leans into the Hall of Fame. For me, he had a really great peak. And I think one of the knocks against him is his sort of post-peak years. So his peak was 1982 to 1987. He won 2 MVPs. And he had 100 RBIs in all but one season. He had 100 or more RBIs in all but one season. Led the league twice in that 82 to 87 range. 36 or more home runs in all but one season. Led the league twice. And over 900 OPS in all but 2 seasons during that range. Elite defense. He won a bunch of Gold Gloves. I think the knock against him that he has is that they feel like the voters feel like he fell off right after that 87 season, and he was still in his early 30s. So the sort of that age range that they like to see performance wasn't really there with him, but he was so good in the 80s throughout that decade.
He was incredible during the 80s. You had mentioned that he had the most home runs of anybody not named Mike Schmidt. He had the most RBI of anybody not named Mike Schmidt. They were tied. The only person that had more RBIs than him was Eddie Murray.
Yeah, that's right.
During that time in the American League. And that's when you really have to look at league, because there was no interleague play. And so when you're comparing Dale Murphy to other players of his generation, you really need to stick in as much as you can in the National League, because that's who they played against. Although I think some of his comparisons of guys that played in the American League and got in are very favorable towards Dale Murphy. But he wasn't good enough late in life argument flies really flat for me, because there are a tremendous amount of people in the baseball universe that are lining up, pining of how the great and mighty Buster Posey is a first ballot Hall of Famer coming up when his name is going to hit the ballot. And Dale Murphy, with the exception of batting average, dwarfs the accomplishments of Buster Posey, who was a peak athlete, had a short career, was good for a very short amount of time, but very good for a very short amount of time, like Dizzy Dean, or like Sandy Koufax, or like Kirby Puckett. And so if you're saying to Dale Murphy, hey, you could be a Hall of Famer if you just would have quit earlier, instead of playing and still being a productive player after your peak years, I don't understand how that is a serious argument that is made by a bunch of people who look at numbers, but I don't think they necessarily know how to interpret those numbers. If you look from 1979 to 1990, so that's 12 seasons, he was first in RBIs 2 times, he was top 5 times, and he was top 15 11 times. So he's always at the top of his game. From 82 to 87, you want to talk about runs created? Isn't that the hallmark of what you do? You try to create runs, right? He had 748 runs created. Number 1 in all of baseball.
Yeah.
That's ahead of Wade Boggs, 731, Tim Raines, 729, Eddie Murray, 690, Mike Schmidt, 689. And who's on top? Dale Murphy. He was also number 1 total bases, number 1 home runs, tied for home runs, number of win probability added, number 1 for Dale Murphy. So your traditional stats, he's at the top. Your metric stats, he's at the top. I don't understand why people can't see how important Dale Murphy was to the Atlanta Braves and how good he was in comparison to the other players that were in that decade. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Famer all day long, every day.
Yeah, I think when the voting was taking place, they didn't have a lot of these advanced analytics. Some of the numbers he threw out sort of lean a little more into that advanced analytics, and some comparables when you apply some of these newer ways of thinking and evaluating. You mentioned Kirby Puckett, that comes up often. Jim Rice and Dave Parker are also players that they sort of point to as similar to what Dale Murphy's contributions were. I think it's also interesting that there's only one other player that has, outside of the PED sort of juiced era players like Bonds and so forth, who are not in the Hall for other reasons. The only other player that doesn't that has 2 MVPs and is not in the Hall is Roger Maris, and he famously has a much shortened career, and so he just doesn't have the volume of work to really support a Hall of Fame entry. So I mean, 2 MVPs and the most dominant player, or one of the most dominant players in the 80s, it's shocking to me that he didn't get higher in his Hall of Fame voting. That he got his second year on the ballot, he only got 23%. That was the most votes he got in Hall of Fame voting. And then when it came to the Veterans Committee, he only got, 6 out of 16 votes. It was about 37%. And I don't know why he's received such disrespect.
I think a lot of it in his early days when he first entered the ballot was mid to late 90s. And it was right in the middle of the steroid era, and they were these writers who, one, don't know crap about most things and are looking just at sort of raw numbers and not understanding or able to interpret them, or looking at what he did versus like, oh, well, he had 44 home runs one year, but McGuire's got 60, and Sosa and Bonds, all the juiced guys, like there was no way that his numbers were going to look comparable to their numbers and what they were seeing every day, even though they were watching a tainted product. So they're voting him down in the steroid era when they're saying there is no steroid era, right? Now they all look back and they're like, oh my God, there's a steroid era. We got to throw all those guys out. But they're all hurting Dale Murphy because these voters are voting during that time with what they're seeing, and they're saying he's not McGuire, he's not Sosa, right? He's not any of those guys. So the raw number, that doesn't mean anything, right? But it does. It does mean something. When you put his comparables, whether it is the raw numbers in a specific time frame, or it's his overall analytic numbers, like for all the analytics guys, right, who are always like, it's all about analytics, and if I don't have an analytic number, I don't have one. Well, let me give you an analytic. Can I give you an analytic number, Jeff?
You can, yes.
So he was top in win probability twice in his career, and he was top 5 4 times. You know who the other player was that did that? Captain Clutch himself, David Ortiz. You're going to tell me David Ortiz is not a Hall of Famer? David Ortiz didn't even play defense. And then they're going to say, oh, well, his WAR is 46.4. Got to be 50. Got to be 50. You know why his WAR is 46.4? Jeff, you know why that is? And most people don't. And all the people that are saying that, he shouldn't be in, they don't know either. Part of it is because your defensive WAR is added into that. And there was no defensive WAR then, and they have to create it and make it up and do it retroactively and try to figure out what it was. And for some odd reason, the little computer nerds sitting there with their little WAR formula watching this game that they don't understand have given him a -2.5 defensive WAR during a time that he won 5 gold gloves. So he's like the best center fielder in baseball, and they're giving him a -2.5? That tells me you don't know what you are talking about, computer nerd guy, which is going to put him, if he has the proper defensive WAR, is going to put him well over 50. Oh, he doesn't have 400 home runs. He's got 398, but don't forget he lost an entire season to the strike. You're going to tell me if 1981 strike doesn't happen, he's not over 400? He's probably at 425. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, 425 was good. Right, but he lost a whole part of that season to the strike.
Well, I think the people who were doing the evaluation and the voting during the time when his ballot was being debated and looked at, I don't know if they're necessarily looking at advanced analytics during that time. But
no, they're not. They're looking at the raw numbers that don't match McGuire and Sosa.
Right. And I think the other thing is they'll point to the post-peak years after 1987. He still had a number of 20-plus home run seasons into his mid-30s. And also pre-peak, in his earlier part of his career, he had a season of 33 home runs with some others that are 20-plus. So he's still putting up offensive numbers. The thing that kind of throws me on a lot of this is, Andrew Jones recently got into the Hall of Fame, right? Mm-hmm. And he's doing it on a defensive-heavy career, right? I mean, he did have power, but he didn't have the slash line that you typically see with a lot of the Hall of Famers, right? I actually was a little down on him just growing up watching Andrew Jones because, the power is great, but I like to see guys who have a little bit more batting average and on base and so forth. And so if you look at that and you're applying sort of that standard that, we're going to weigh heavy on defense, he wasn't the Andrew Jones defensively, but he was still a very solid, very good defensive player. And then you add in the exceptional offense that he had. He was a top non-WAR player throughout the entire 80s. If you're using WAR and you're looking at some of those advanced measures, and that is, adjusted WAR. So it just doesn't add up for me because it's sort of, he was, exceptional defensively and he was exceptional hitting wise, and maybe he didn't have the Hall of Fame creds that you have on some of the surefire Hall of Famers with the bat or with the defense, but he had both enough that you could combine it to make the case for him in the Hall of Fame.
And if you look at why the numbers are the way that they are, This is when it all goes back to, I've always said this, right? Analytics is basic blackjack strategy, and then watching the game and understanding what you're seeing is counting cards, right? Well, they always say, his average isn't high enough, 265, right? It's higher than Harmon Killebrew at 256. It's higher than Gary Carter at 262. Plus, he had more home runs and RBIs, and his OPS plus is better than Gary Carter. It's higher than Ozzie Smith at 262. They say defense doesn't matter, Dale Murphy, but it matters for Ozzie Smith. Ozzie Smith had 28 career home runs and a lower batting average than Dale Murphy, but they're like, oh, but he was a good defender. Well, so was Dale Murphy. So what is it? Is defense doesn't matter or defense does matter?
Yeah.
But why are his numbers maybe less than they could be? And why is Jim Rice's numbers maybe better than they should be? Did you know that Dale Murphy only had 3 teammates in the entire 1980s that hit over 300? 3. You know who that was? That was Bob Horner, hit 303 in 1983. Deion James hit 314 in 1987. And Lonnie Smith hit 315 in 1989. So there's not a damn person on base for him to be able to knock them in. Did you know that Jim Rice had 20 300 hitters during that decade? 20 to 3. So of course Jim Rice is going to have more RBIs. Even Wade Boggs led the league in on-base percentage 6 times during that time. So of course he is going to have more. His on-base percentage, Rice, they're like, oh, it's not as good as Jim Rice. It was 352 to 346. Come on. They're practically equal. Now, in the 10 years that he didn't have any of those guys hitting 300, do you know how many guys he had on his team, Dale Murphy, that was driving in 90 runs? Somebody else you had to be scared about in the lineup? Do you know how many he had? 1. Bob Horner. 1 time, Bob Horner. He had in 1982, he had 97 RBIs. In that same time period, Jim Rice had 17 guys on his team with more than 90 RBIs. So there was somebody behind him that you had to worry about. Plus, and to be able to do all of this, to lead the league in runs, to lead the league in home runs over the course of the decade, he had to do that all by himself. And when you look at the extra boulder that he had to push compared to somebody else, it's like he's like a quarterback on a Conference USA team that plays 6 or 7 non-conference games against Power 5 schools compared to the quarterback at Alabama who's got every 5-star recruit sitting around him.
Right. Well, and plus, Red Sox have that nonsense with the Green Monster where they can take advantage of their park and utilize that. I wanted to ask you before we move on, going to tell you're very passionate about this.
I love Dale Murphy, and he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Do you think he's the biggest Hall of Fame snub?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
There's not a single person that's ahead of him. He's the very first person outside of the door. The only person that comes close is Don Mattingly, and the only reason it's Don Mattingly is because of what he's done in his managerial and coaching career. And if Don Mattingly wins the World Series as Phillies manager this year, Don Mattingly they should be able to combine what he's done, like Joe Torre, who wasn't necessarily a Hall of Fame player, but he was a Hall of Fame manager, and the two combined made him a shoo-in. That should be for Don Mattingly. But no, very first person on the other side of the door is Dale Murphy, and he needs to be on the right side of that door.
Yeah, we had someone comment and ask who, on our post, was he the biggest snub, or
yes,
who else would you put in? Actually, I thought of Don Mattingly as well. So. So, yeah.
But if your Hall of Fame criteria is ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contribution to the team, tell me which one of those that Dale Murphy didn't do. He did all of them. Because
by all accounts, he was an amazing teammate and an amazing
team. Roberto Clemente Award winner.
Yeah.
Highest of high character guys in an era of right before a bunch of low character guys. And he is everything that you want. And you know what else, Jeff? You know what else? He is the only one of that entire era that has his own country song. Not that he recorded, but recorded about him, called Dale Murphy for the Hall of Fame, where the chorus goes, Dale Murphy was a 2-time MVP, back-to-back in 82 and 83. He's the reason us kids wore number 3. He was more than the best player I've ever seen. Nobody else has a country song.
We're going to have to find that song and post it. We'll post it when we
It's fantastic. It's glorious, that song. But no, he's got to be. And don't forget, when you talk about him as a center fielder, don't forget, in his defense, he's a converted catcher. He came up as a catcher. How many other catchers went out to center field? Craig Biggio? He's the only one. Rafael Devers couldn't even handle going from third to first. And he's going from catcher to outfield and winning Gold Gloves. Outfield and winning 69 errors, Jeff, in his entire career at the outfield in 1,891 games. 69 errors. In center field, 1,041. 39 errors in 1,000 games. Over 1,000 games for a catcher playing center field. Riddle me that, Jeff. Well, I'm mad.
I can tell. I knew this was going to be a passionate segment with you because I know how much you love Dale.
I love Dale Murphy.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's move on before we could probably spend a whole show talking about Dale Murphy. But let's move on. We're going to talk about another disrespected ball player, but little remembered, and it's Andy Hawkins, who was a pitcher with the Padres, and he was with the Yankees. And in 1985, he had a dream start to his season. On May 30th, he became the first pitcher since the start of the divisional play in 1969, the first to win his first 10 starts. And it was a bit unheralded that season. He was ultimately left off the All-Star team. He finished this season at 18-8, still a really good record. So that means he went 8-8 after those first 10 starts. But should he have made the All-Star team that year? Was it a huge snub? And any thoughts on Andy Hawkins?
I do. I say yes and no. But first off, let's look at Andy Hawkins on the career for a little bit. And I'd just like to let you know that Dale Murphy hit 308 off of Andy Hawkins in his career with 5 home runs and 19 RBIs. And in his stellar year of 1985, when Andy Hawkins was a dominant pitcher, he hit 421 with 3 doubles, 2 home runs, 6 RBIs. He had an .895 slugging percentage and a .1295 OPS off of Andy Hawkins that year. So he couldn't get out one Dale Murphy.
I'm going to go out on a limb, even though I wasn't in the debate room when any of these writers were debating what to do with Dale Murphy in the Hall of Fame. But I'm going to guess it's probably unlikely that they looked at his numbers against Andy Hawkins.
Yeah, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying. We're talking about Andy Hawkins being dominant, and he was not dominant against Dale Murphy. But I will say about young Andy Hawkins, who had the unfortune of throwing a no-hitter later in his career as a member of the New York Yankees and losing that game 4-0 to the Chicago White Sox on a handful of errors in the 8th inning. He would absolutely 100% be an all-star in 2026 because of this and this alone. There are 12 pitchers on the roster now, and there were 8 then. And that needs to be a consideration that there were only 8. And I don't know if you remember this about 1985. What were you doing in 1985, Jeff? You were just finishing up the 5th grade. It was the summer between 5th and 6th grade for you, right?
Yep.
Same for me. But I was also at Busch Stadium on Friday, July 12th, which was right before the All-Star game. My one and only trip to Busch Stadium was the old Busch Stadium with the hard AstroTurf in the bowl. And that was the day that Dick Williams had to decide between Lamar Hoyt and Joaquin Andujar being his starting pitcher. And he said whoever pitched better in that game on Friday was going to be the starter. And I was at that game, and he had made that announcement before, and I was like, wow, it blew my mind. I'm like, how am I so lucky to be in St. Louis on this special day? Well, Lamar Hoyt outpitched him through a two-hit shutout, beat him 2-0 over 7 innings. Joaquin Andahar pitched pretty well. 8 innings pitched, 8 hits, 2 runs, but it wasn't enough. He got banged around by Tim Flannery and Greg Nettles, both with RBI singles that day. And Joaquin Andahar was not going to be the starting pitcher in the All-Star game. And Joaquin Andahar said, I am not here to try and impress Dick Williams. He is not a special guy. He said, I am going home to the Dominican Republic. I am not going to the All-Star game. I'm going to go eat barbecued quail in the DR. And he left. And he went to the DR. And they asked him if he was going to come back or what would happen the next time he saw Dick Williams. And Joaquin Andahar said one of the great quotes. He said, there was one word in America that sums it all up. You never know. Anyway, where I'm going with all of this is that because he decided not to go, they got to add another pitcher. And Andy Hawkins sort of thought it was going to be him. And it ended up being Ron Darling. And I would defend that Ron Darling was the right decision over Andy Hawkins.
Yeah, they also had Dwight Gooden, Ron Darling's teammate on that team, that All-Star team. So you could kind of make an argument that maybe giving it to Andy Hawkins, but...
No, and I'll tell you why. The Padres that year had 5 starters and 2 bench players already on the roster. Tony Gwynn, Terry Kennedy, Steve Garvey, Greg Nettles, Lamar Hoyt were all starting the game. And then Gary Templeton and Goose Gossage coming off the bench. The New York Mets that year were 2.5 games out of first place behind St. Louis. And the only All-Stars they had were Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. And while Andy Hawkins' first half of 11-2 and 3.35 ERA were excellent, Ron Darling was 10-2 with a 2.62. So no, I would not defend adding an 8th Padre to the lineup
right
in that particular year.
Yeah, I was going to say if you wanted to make an argument maybe with him or Scott Gerald's.
No,
but
not Scott Gerald.
They didn't have a lot, and he was a reliever, and they didn't have a lot of representation.
They had no representation, which meant they had to have one, and that was him. So if you're going to look at that pitching staff, which was Lamar Hoyt, Scott Geralds, Dwight Gooden, Jeff Reardon, Nolan Ryan, Goose Gossage, and Fernando Valenzuela. Now, Scott Gerald's untouchable. He's the only Giant. Rules say you have to have one. Can't do anything with him. Jeff Reardon, Goose Gossage, both relievers. So you're not going to not have relievers. So you've got to keep both of those guys on. Which means your only choice to add Andy Hawkins is either in the place of Joaquin Andahar instead of Ron Darling, or he has to replace Dwight Gooden, who's 13-3 with a 1.68. Don't think that's an option. The other is Fernando Valenzuela, who is 10-8, not as good, but with 2.3 ERA. Or Nolan Ryan, which is probably the best case, at 8-6 and a 3.5 ERA. And the Astros, though, only had one other representative, that being Jose Cruz. So now you're saying, oh, well, the Astros get 1, the Padres get 8, and we're taking Andy Hawkins instead of Nolan Ryan. And that's the predicament that you're in if you're Dick Williams or you're the American League office who's putting that together. They always blame the manager, but the manager in conjunction with the league office is who comes up with the formula to create the All-Star team. So as good as Andy Hawkins was, he was a victim of circumstance to not be an All-Star that year, and that was his best chance in his entire career.
Yeah, and I think going back to what I was going to say about Scott Gerald, you'd have to kind of shuffle around the whole roster. And so I agree with you. Kind of hard to fit him in. But also the numbers kind of dropped off after his first 10 starts in the several games sort of between that 10th start and then
and the All-Star break.
All-Star game. I mean, he's looking at a mid 4 ERA, right? 4.5 around there. He had, through like the first week of July, so He had 48 innings, 55 hits, 23 earned runs. So not really spectacular numbers kind of after those first 10 starts. It is a shame because he did have such a fantastic year. So kind of a footnote in baseball history. I don't think a lot of people really remember Andy Hawkins. He didn't make any All-Star teams, as we've been talking about. He hasn't really. He has like some pitcher of the month recognition one of the years. But other than that, I think his biggest. He's known for two things. Actually, one we talked about, which was the no-hitter you mentioned, which actually MLB changed to the next year because he only went 8 innings since the Yankees were losing, and they said you had to throw at least 9 innings for a no-hitter. So a rule change sort of took that away from him. But he's also the only Padres pitcher to ever get a win in the World Series. And this was in Game 2 of the 1984 World Series against the Tigers. He came in with 2 outs in the first inning. Ed Whitson had started and was getting sort of beat up. And so they brought him in. He went 5 1/3 innings, and he ended up qualifying for the win. And only Padres pitcher ever to get a win in the World Series. So way to go, Andy Hawkins there.
And on a side note, Ed Whitson was my old pitching coach. So
wow.
There you have it.
Wow. Right.
And did you know that the National League won that All-Star game at the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome 6-1 on a double by Dale Murphy off of Jack Morris, who is in the Hall of Fame.
I'm sensing a theme here.
I'm just saying. If you know, you know. If you watched baseball in the 80s, you know. Dale Murphy. Of course Dale Murphy was at the All-Star game. Of course Dale Murphy was getting a big extra base hit off a Hall of Fame pitcher. Because that's what Dale Murphy did.
Well, let's move on to another baseball post we made. It was not in the 80s. However, it was in 1993, and that is the year that Dale Murphy retired. So, but this one was about Jose Canseco, and it's kind of a fun, sort of goofy moment in baseball. I think everyone's probably seen the picture. It's one of the most famous sort of bloopers in baseball history. And Jose Canseco, very polarizing player, kind of a punching bag. From his juiced era drama to his antics to some of his bizarre behavior, but he was someone who never took himself too seriously. He could laugh at himself, and he did so on May 26, 1993, when he was playing outfield for the Tigers, and the ball... the Texas Rangers. And the ball bounced off his head and went over the wall. They were playing Cleveland, and it was a home run, and Jose Canseco later joked that it should be called a 4-base error. And he had a couple other sort of quips about it after the game. I think he kind of leaned into the humor of the whole thing, as the rest of the baseball world did. But it's kind of one of those famous moments that everyone sort of sees where he's sort of confused and the ball's bouncing over his head. But do you remember that play? And what do you think about Jose Canseco just overall?
I do remember that play, and I know why you said Tigers. Because in the movie, for love of the game, they ripped that play off. And there was a fly ball that had supposedly happened in Minnesota where Mickey Scales, the right fielder, was going out and the ball hit him over on the head and it went over the outfield fence. And it was just at the time that Kevin Costner was being a jerk to Kelly Preston and we needed a redeeming moment. So that's probably why they wrote it into the story. And he told Mickey that... for some reason, the starting pitcher is going to go out and work the outfield wall with the rookie outfielder so that doesn't happen again. But it was the exact play, and that team, of course, was the Tigers that Kevin Costner was on in For Love of the Game. So that's probably where Tigers came from. I do remember that, and I always thought it was funny. I kind of liked Jose Canseco, and there was a time in my life that I ran into Jose Canseco about every other year or so, just sort of randomly at some event. And he's a funny guy. Mm-hmm. And you are right. He does not take himself seriously, but he's had a lot of missteps in his life. And that's sort of what I remember his life as a series of missteps. The Bash brothers were great. I remember he had a short run as a Yankee and as a Tampa Ray. and then, of course, that time with the Tigers. But I really remember him shooting his finger off in 2014. But in classic Jose Canseco style, he went to a poker game and he brought a prosthetic finger and he faked that his finger fell off at the poker table and freaked everybody out, and then sat back and had a great laugh about it. And that was and is kind of who Jose Canseco is. Some of his misgivings far more serious than others, but he always seemed to find a way to make his life okay.
Well, I have a personal story to share about Jose Canseco, because you may recall we approached him about a project, and we saw him here in Los Angeles at Hollywood Park Casino. As you mentioned, he loves to play poker, and we had been thinking about him for something, and I went up to him and introduced myself, and he was very nice, and did think it was odd that he was playing like very low limit poker, but
he's also not very good at poker.
Right. So he's playing, and he was very cordial. He gave me his phone number, and we called him about a month later, you may recall, and he remembered me like to very small details. He remembered, like, he up to him, and he had about a 45-minute call with us, and was very nice and listened and very attentive on the call, and I that sort of struck me in a really good way, because he's probably someone that a lot of people come up to and want to talk to him and want to throw all kinds of things at him, and for him to remember our conversation from a month ago, that and to spend the time and not really, and be someone who's kind of authentic and genuine, and he didn't really, you didn't feel like he was sort of rushing you through the call. He seemed happy to chat. I always thought that was really positive. It kind of spoke well about his personality, and and he's polarizing. I think I always thought Juiced, he sort of got unfairly sort of blamed or sort of beaten down over Juiced, but everyone talks about how the steroid era was so terrible for baseball, and so glad that we kind of pulled back the curtain on all these kind of misdeeds that were happening in baseball, and he's the one who really did that. And so if it was such a bad era for baseball, then why is he getting such blowback for that? And I get it that he did it to write a book for money, and that he was sort of angry at baseball because he felt he was blackballed and all kinds of things, but isn't he someone that should be sort of like, why shoot the messenger, right? He's someone who really just kind of exposed what was going on.
Yeah, I thought a lot of what he had to go through was silly, because everyone said, oh, well, he's crazy, and Jose Canseco was just making up all this stuff, and he turned out to be right about a whole lot of it. And yeah, he's trying to make a little money off of his book, but what I thought was disingenuous is all those people saying, oh man, Jose, you're making us all look bad. Right. Well, maybe you look bad because you are bad.
Right.
But he had a pretty cool little run trying to make it in reality TV. He was on The Surreal Life. He was on The Celebrity Apprentice. I don't know if you know this, but he did a movie in 2003. He did a film called Stripper's Ball.
I haven't heard of this.
Starring Jose Canseco and Dennis Rodman, with adult film actresses Jenna Jameson and Jill Kelly. And Jill Kelly was in He Got Game with Ray Allen and Denzel Washington. And we know that Denzel Washington was in Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, who was in Apollo 13 with Kevin Bacon. So just 3 steps, Jose Canseco, 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon in his film career.
I thought you were going to bring up Dale Murphy.
No, Dale Murphy. No, Dale Murphy was not in Stripper's Ball. Dale Murphy. No, Dale Murphy works at a foundation called I Won't Cheat, which is partnered with Little League.
Well, didn't Jose Canseco and Jenna Jameson date for a while?
I like they do not know.
He had an adult industry girlfriend for a while. So
Yeah, I do not know, but I used to run into him a lot of time at after parties for TV shows and films when I'd work on here in Vegas, because his girlfriend at the time was a sort of a part-time actress, and she worked a lot in Vegas. So she was in a lot of these commercials or TV shows or, films, legit studio films, not adult films. And so he would come with her to the rap parties, which is where I would constantly run into him. But then he had that whole little phase where he decided that he was going to be an MMA fighter. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that's right.
And he got beat by Hongman Choi, who knocked him out in the first round. And then he did celebrity boxing, where he got knocked out by Vi Sikahema. Remember Vi Sikahema, the running back from BYU, right, who went to the Eagles? And then he had a majority draw with Danny Bonaducci.
Didn't he do like some kind of boxing match and he had his twin brother stand in for him?
That I don't remember. I know he fought some guy from Barstool or one of those like fringe sports shows. Yeah. And he got beat pretty badly. And then he had another fight against some guy I've never heard of, which is not odd in celebrity boxing because it's not really celebrity boxing.
And then he got pulled over for having a goat?
Yes, he got pulled over by the Nevada Highway Patrol for having unleashed goats in the back of his convertible that were wearing diapers. And so the Nevada Highway Patrol pulled him over, and they're like, what is going on? And he's like, my girlfriend got these goats, and then I had to pick them up, and I was in my car, and I didn't know what to do, and so she was going to be mad if I didn't pick them up, so I put diapers on them so they wouldn't, poo in the car. And they were just like, okay, we just make sure you're not drunk. Bye, Jose. And they let him go. Yeah. But no, that's the kind of life that Jose Canseco has. He's an interesting cat.
Well, let's move on. We'll leave baseball behind. I think that's a good note to conclude on there. And let's move into a little bit of NBA, because we did also post about some NBA. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of timely as we are moving into the finals. And so on May 31st, 2018, we had Jose Canseco. We talked about his bonehead where the ball bounced over the wall, but we have a different kind of bonehead, which is a very famous mental mistake by J.R. Smith in Game 1 of the NBA Finals back in 2018. He got an offensive rebound with 4.7 seconds left, and the game tied, and casually dribbled it out to half court, and then realized it was tied with 1 second left, and he panicked and passed the ball to George Hill, who couldn't get the shot off. The Cowboys went on to OT and lost, and that spoiled actually a huge game from LeBron James. He had 51 points. Mm-hmm. And the Cavs were swept that year, and that game was really interesting because the Cavs came in big underdogs, and it was just kind of a big psychological blow. And just a thing to note about this game, LeBron was so angry he punched the wall in the locker room.
Yeah, he punched the whiteboard and broke his hand.
And he was playing injured the rest of that series. So I'm sure you remember that. I know as a Cavs fan, you remember that game.
I do, and it created the LeBron James meme with his arms out like this. That was
that's right. Yeah.
Meme came out of that as everyone was like, "What are you doing?" Because it wasn't just an offensive rebound. Don't undersell it. It was a offensive rebound in the paint, right, where all he had to do was go back up, and he was either going to make the shot probably or get fouled.
Yeah.
And even if he missed it, they wouldn't have been any worse off than they already were. But he dribbled it out. And the sad part is that's not out of character for J.R. Smith. J.R. Smith may be, if you had to describe one person as a 0 IQ basketball player, it would be J.R. Smith. Yeah. And some of it is not his fault, and a lot of it is.
Well, and in his approach after the game, too, and sort of when he reflects on it, sort of is like, almost as, you win some, you lose some. And it's like kind of a big deal because that was a huge... If they would have won that game, I think psychologically they would have entered Game 2 feeling like they have an edge on this Warriors team that was vastly superior by all accounts. And it just seemed like he didn't appreciate the moment, even in hindsight. He's been asked a lot about that moment. Sports Illustrated actually has that as the number one mental mistake. They put together a list of like the top 10 mental mistakes in sports history, and that's listed as number one for Sports Illustrated. You have Chris Webber's timeout,
Oh, yeah.
or the timeout that didn't happen as number two. So there's some other ones that are lesser known around sports. But yeah, I mean, so how do you feel? I know you're someone who gets very frustrated. In fact, I want to share with the audience, you've said one of the greatest lines to me in softball ever. And I always remember this when we were playing softball, and people would say, rec league softball, and someone's throwing the ball and they throw it to the wrong base, and you would say, and people would say, I'm sorry, I'm not that good. And you say, don't have to be good to know which base to throw it to.
That is correct. You do not have to be good to know what base to throw to. You do not have to be good to know what the score is and how much time is left. And J.R. Smith's approach to this, in his sort of laissez-faire feeling on it, and I'm like, oh, well, I did the wrong thing, but I was trying to do the right thing.
Right.
If the situation was what I thought it was. And listen, we all misspeak. I will mean one team and I will say another that's in my head. I did it at the beginning of the show, saying overrated when I meant underrated. Like stuff like that happens, right? But I'm never intending to do that. And J.R. Smith he's intending to do the right thing. He doesn't know what the right thing is, or he doesn't pay enough attention to what that situation is. And it all started, I think, for him by coming to the NBA straight out of high school. And if there's a cautionary tale for why the NBA is so against going straight from high school to the pros now, it's somebody like J.R. Smith. Because he had absolutely no business going to the Hornets right out of high school because he didn't know anything. And Byron Scott, who was the head coach in New Orleans, and we all remember Byron Scott from the Showtime Lakers, and they learned how to do things right under Pat Riley or Magic Johnson, or somebody was going to whoop you. Kareem's going to make sure he did the right thing. So Byron Scott didn't have a whole lot of patience for J.R. Smith because he would often either rush down and jack up a contested three earlier in the shot clock, or he would dribble around and give the ball a headache until there was no time left and he would jack up a terrible shot. Or he would dribble himself into a double or triple team with no plan of where to go. So he turned the ball over a lot, took a lot of crappy shots, and he just had enough. Until they got Chris Paul. And so they draft Chris Paul, and now he's finally got a point guard. But Chris Paul is also young, learning, and Byron Scott just had enough. He couldn't do it. And so they shipped him off to Denver to George Karl. And what do we know about George Karl? George Karl does not suffer fools.
Yeah.
And J.R. Smith is a fool because he did the same thing. He would get in pressure situations, jack it up, drive, shoot. And it didn't work. And George Karl finally realized, you know what, I got to put him on the second unit. Because as the second unit, he'll have a lot more freedom. There won't be the double team. There won't be the defensive integrity. He'll probably be able to score, which he did. It was a very good use of J.R. Smith. But this is J.R. Smith in a nutshell. So J.R. Smith gets in an auto accident, runs a stop sign, wasn't wearing his seatbelt. The passenger in the car with him is killed. J.R. Smith is convicted and has to spend, gets a 90-day jail sentence and spends 30 days in jail. And when he's in jail, he says to reporters, this has really changed him. He sees the whole world in a new light, and that he's ready to become the basketball player and the person that he should have been all along. So he gets out of jail and he goes to training camp, and the first thing he does is start complaining to George Karl that he doesn't want to come off the bench anymore. Like, that's J.R. Smith. It's just train wreck after train wreck after train wreck. And when there was the lockout, what did he do? Did he wait for the lockout to be over? No. He signed a deal in China for $3 million.
Oh, I remember that.
He goes to China. The season starts, and he can't come back because he's still in China. Do you know that when he was in China, he missed 80 practices when he was in China?
Wow.
So it's just one thing after another. And every time that he starts to get a little bit ahead and starts to figure it out, comes back, goes to the Knicks. Things start to work out a little bit with the Knicks. It's a 6-man. Everything's going great. And then what happens? Phil Jackson comes in. Phil Jackson's not going to suffer fools. He's just like, he's worse than George Karl about that sort of stuff. So he's out again.
Yeah.
And it's just repeat after repeat after repeat after repeat that he says, I want to learn my lesson, but it's only in mouth only, not action.
Yeah, I mean, some people are their own worst enemies.
Mm-hmm.
I just sort of putting J.R. Smith aside, just talking about, because he's hardly the only player that has made terrible mental mistakes. I mean, obviously, the circumstance of his Game 1 finals mental mistake is obviously pretty bad. But, to me, it's kind of comes down to the player's decision tree, right? And I think of sort of baseball, when you're learning baseball or softball, and you look at sort of what is the situation, and you go through sort of the drill in your head. What am I going to do if the ball comes to me? Based on who's on base, who's going to, knowing where everyone is going to move, right? Where all the defenders are going to move. Same thing in football. If we run the play, who's moving where and who's covering what, and I think everyone can make a physical mistake, right? There's people get anxiety, people get nervous. People have limitations on what their skills can be, right? And I know you'll watch a reliever, you'll get very frustrated that they aren't throwing strikes. Sometimes they just can't hit their spot for whatever numerous reasons. And I think with mental errors, those are worse to me because it's sort of your decision tree and what you need to be thinking about is breaking down. And it's that you don't have the ability to do it, because clearly if you sat down someone like J.R. Smith and you say, hey, we're in this situation, what would you want to do in this situation? And he's not in the game. He's just sort of looking at sort of a chalkboard or a textbook. He's going to tell you exactly what needs to happen because he knows what needs to happen. It's the mental focus, your mental commitment, your preparation, and staying in the moment. I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of players. They kind of get out of the moment. They sort of get ahead of themselves. They get their egos involved, whatever the case is.
Yeah, especially in those situations where you do have time to process what's going on. And that is the case in J.R. Smith. And they were at the foul line. So at the foul line, you're checking the score, you're checking the time on the clock, you're checking how many timeouts do you have? And then you're trying to run through in your head, where are my outlet passes going to be if I pull down a rebound in a place that I can't go back up? So the first thing you're saying to yourself is rebound, go back up, because we only have 4 seconds. But I do have 4 seconds if for some reason I bobble the ball. If there's a double team, I'm in a trap, I'm in a bad spot. Where's the shooter going to go? Where's George Hill going to go? Where are my wing guards going to go? All that stuff needs to be processing in your head. Just like when you're in the infield and you're like, okay, runner on first, I got 2 outs. Where are my plays? And you sort of run that through your head each and every pitch so that you're not caught off guard when it all happens in real time. It's not as much like hockey where you're head up reading and reacting. In those situations, you have to run that through. And I just think there's a lot of coaches that don't coach that anymore.
Right.
That players are just so used to being told what they're doing that the instinct is gone. They're not playing on the playground and figuring it out anymore. They're not having to put any sort of strategy together. They're not watching a ton of games. They're all out playing, or they're playing video games. They're not watching NBA games when they're growing up very often. So it's getting worse and worse when you start to see just how mismanaged clock and score are at the end of games in basketball and football.
And a lot of it's muscle memory. Look, there is a link between the physical and the mental ability, right? Because if you panic and you sometimes you feel you don't have the skills to make whatever the shot is, the correct pitch, the correct throw, whatever the case is. So there is that sort of muscle memory that you get from the fundamentals and learning sort of the game that way. but in the end, you should have, once you've developed that, it's really staying with your focus, staying with your preparation, and staying with your proper decision tree so that you can, it's an automatic thing once you get to that moment. And look, I'm a terrible athlete, so I would probably make a lot of these mistakes, but I can speak to other moments where it's crunch time, maybe not in sports, but I mean, this extends outside of sports to a lot of different fields where you're up against it and there's pressure situations and you have to have planned ahead of time. What's your decision going to be if various scenarios unfold? And it's an automatic thing. And the people who are successful and make less mental mistakes are the ones who have sort of planned that out, thought through sort of what's going to happen, and have the confidence which only comes through sort of repetition and being ready and being prepared.
Yeah, the physical mistakes are going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about them. But the mental ones are avoidable. I mean, I played on a team one year. I played first base, and we could never ever get our pitcher to cover first base on a ground ball to the right side. Right. And he'd be like, "Well, I didn't know if that was one I needed to cover or not." I'm like, "You need to cover them all. Right. Like, if the ball's hit to your left, just go to first base. And you can always stop when you see that it's unnecessary. Yeah. But just go every time. And then if you think about it or you pause or you hesitate or you're like, this has got to be reaction. Go.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's talk about another basketball moment with a player who is not J.R. Smith, who probably...
Yes, that makes the right decision a lot.
And has far fewer mental mistakes, and that's Klay Thompson. And so... we talked about Cleveland playing the Warriors. And so this was a year that Golden State lost their championship to Cleveland. The 2016 playoffs, where on May 28th, the Warriors, Klay Thompson made 11 3-points in 18 attempts. He had 41 points total, and this propelled Golden State to a Game 6 win against the Thunder. And then they'd close out the Western Conference Finals in Game 7, en route to facing LeBron and the Cavs in the finals, and then that would be the year that the Cavs actually did win the finals. They met 4 years total, Warriors winning 3 of those 4 years, but this was the year that the Cavs won. Klay Thompson, a little fun fact about me, I'm not a big fan of the Golden State Warriors, but Klay Thompson was easily my favorite player on the Warriors team. He's the one player I was actually pretty enthusiastic about. Not a big fan of Steph or Draymond, but I like Klay Thompson a lot. Something about him was just fun to watch, and I think I liked his personality a lot.
Yeah, he never talked. He didn't talk to officials. He didn't talk to other players. He didn't really talk to his teammates. He didn't talk to the media. He just showed up and shot. And, this was one of those games that he just went off. It was just a game. It's game sticks Klay. And he's so good because he can, unlike J.R. Smith, who finds himself in situations that are inescapable, is that Klay Thompson's singular focus is get open, catch ball, shoot. And he's so good at squaring up to the basket. And I would make an argument that he is fundamentally a better form shooter than Steph Curry, even though Steph Curry will have more points at the end of the day. But fundamentally, if you're going to teach somebody how to look at when they shoot, it would be Klay Thompson. Because it said it doesn't matter if his back's to the basket, if he's catching it on the run, if he's dribbling into it. By the time he is ready to shoot, his feet are square to the basket and he's straight up and his release is the same every time.
Yeah, I think Curry's a lot more volume shooting, right? So he's going to put up a lot more points more often, but Klay could, he could have these huge outbursts. He had this 60 points in 29 minutes game. And
do you know in that 60-point 29-minute game that he had the ball in his hands for less than 90 seconds that game?
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, 90 seconds, that's like 3 drives for J.R. Smith.
And I think you can make the argument that his sort of how he fit in that team, especially on the year that they had, or during the period that they had Durant and Curry, and he was really willing to accept sort of a lesser role and to take sort of or under the radar role, let those those players have the attention and have the ball more often. And he provided defense oftentimes for that Warriors team in a way that he could cover the more difficult, opponents where it didn't fatigue Steph Curry as much to have to expend a lot of energy on defense. That's something that Clay could kind of fill that role. So he offered a lot on both sides of the ball that I think really allowed that Warriors team to exist in their dynasty. They probably would have still won, maybe not as much as, maybe they have one or two less titles without Clay.
Oh, for sure. He really was that cog, and it's underappreciated what he did defensively and always guarding the best offensive player. And it's funny when they talk about, he always talks about the play that haunts him the most in his life was the Kyrie Irving shot that won the NBA championship for Cleveland in this year, because he was guarding Kyrie and he got caught up in a screen and he switched and Steph ended up on Kyrie and Kyrie shot over him because Steph is 4 inches shorter than Klay Thompson. Right. And he's like, that was a weak screen. Like, I should never have gotten caught in a switch ever. And that's the play that haunts him. It's a defensive play. Like, you think about all the shooters, that the shot that they missed is what haunts them, and the switch that he made that he felt like he shouldn't have is what haunts Klay Thompson. And I really I like him. I've enjoyed him his whole career.
So, what did you think of the trade? Warriors moving on from Clay, and were you surprised, or did you think that really was sort of the decline of their dynasty?
It was a little bit of the decline of their dynasty. It was a contract issues in order to be make sure that everybody fits in under the cap. He was also coming back. He had come back from the injury. Remember he got hurt in 2019, and then he had missed the season. Yeah. And I think it was just sort of the way that they envisioned the Warriors moving forward. Yeah, you certainly, if you have to make a salary cut, sort of performance-wise, you still need to keep Draymond Green because you need what he does, and you can't trade Steph if you're Golden State. The PR nightmare. It'd be like a Luka situation, right? They Warriors would be in a Luka situation if they traded Steph. So he had to be the odd man out. And I just I hope that they can find a way to get good quick in Dallas, because I think Klay Thompson, Cooper Flagg together is an exciting proposition.
Yeah, the Warriors wanted to commit to Poole and Wiggins and invest sort of in their future, got some draft picks back, and the as you mentioned, the cap.
The cap doing what it's supposed to do, spreading out talent.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, well, I just wanted to get your take on that. I know there's a couple other history posts I want to talk about. This was actually the one I was looking forward to the most. Is about Jesse Owens. And I think, obviously most people are aware of Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics, the Berlin Olympics, and that's definitely very deserving of that storied recognition and proud representation of the United States in that Olympics. But I don't think as many people are aware that he was probably the best college track athlete in the history of college. And he ran for the Ohio State University. And he had what's considered the greatest 45 minutes in sports, when he set 5 track world records and equaled a 6th. And this was in 1935. Do you know you're a proud fan of the Ohio State University? Have you seen a lot of his recognitions on campus there?
Yeah, the track and field stadium is named after him. There are multiple sort of statues and plaques and honors to him throughout the university, and he's a major presence there on campus, just about anywhere that you go. Streets and streets named after him, buildings and whatnot. But what a 45 minutes to be able to set 5 world records and equal a 6th. And it gets a little confusing in what that means, because he was only in 4 events, but he got 5 records and tied a 6th. And how that happened is that he was in the 100 meters, which he tied the existing world record. That was the first. And then he went to the long jump pit, and he set a world record in the long jump. So that now he's got a tie in his own record. And then he went to run the 220-yard dash and the 220-yard low hurdles. And what happened is he set a world record in the 220-yard dash and the 220-yard low hurdles. But as we know, because we're all good at math and English imperial to metric conversion, is that 220 yards is equal to 201 meters and 17 centimeters. So what he did was he ran faster than the 200-meter record flat and faster than the 200-meter low hurdle record flat because he was traveling 1 meter and 17 centimeters further. He therefore gets the 200-meter and the 200-meter hurdle record. So he broke 2 records in each of those races. That's how he got to 5 and 1 tie.
Yeah, and also impressive. World records are obviously very impressive, but he also won 8 individual NCAA titles in only 2 years. And no one's won 8 ever in their college career, but he did it in 2 years. And he won the 100 meter, the 220, the long jump, and the low hurdles, those 4 both years. So just really impressive. It's a lot of just records, undefeated in Big Ten competitions, and just overall an amazing athlete.
In 1935, he entered 42 events and won them all.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and then he went to the Olympics and won 4 gold medals in 1936.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because kind of moving away from the athletics, although they're intertwined, is the cultural impact of Jesse Owens, and this predates Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali, who are both sort of huge figures in sort of sports and civil rights movement. And this really occurred sort of before the official start of what we would consider the civil rights movement, but there is some roots in that movement, and pointing to Jesse Owens. I mean, there's obviously the pretty well-known one that there was, the Nazis and their Aryan superiority, and he went there and really sort of crushed that image and sort of that messaging that was coming out of Nazi Germany, and that was well reported by the American media, and everyone sort of rallied around that. He experienced extreme poverty. He had a lot of housing issues throughout college years, and he also experienced a lot of segregation, and he wasn't as sort of overt in being a figure like Jackie Robinson was, but he did talk a lot about experiencing those challenges and those difficulties, and it was well reported, and that was someone that Black Americans could really point to and be really proud of that history, and he was an early hero in sort of the fight for equality.
Yeah, and Larry Snyder was important in that, the head track coach at Ohio State, and he was one of the first college coaches to start to integrate his teams, and he really developed a great relationship with Jesse Owens. Jesse had worked a lot during his college because he only had a partial scholarship. They only had partial track scholarships at the time. And so he was often doing work, and Coach Snyder was really good about fitting his training around not just his class schedule, but his work schedule, because he was responsible, for his wife, his child, and a host of other family commitments. And it was unfortunate the way that he was treated when he got home. And one thing that he had always said, that he said maybe the most disappointing thing that he had to go through was that he said, yeah, Adolf Hitler didn't shake my hand, but neither did FDR. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't invite him to the White House. He didn't shake his hand. And so, yeah, FDR and Hitler, neither one of them would acknowledge him. And, you expect that out of Hitler. Yeah. But it's sad when it comes from FDR.
Yeah, and there's actually been a lot of discussion. This is something I heard about years ago, and it's been talked about a lot more recently, that the Nazi POWs during that time were treated better than a lot of the black Americans in the United States. They were, better housing and better access to services, and obviously that's a much more complicated, and there's a lot of politics around that with POWs and so forth. But doesn't necessarily surprise me. The good thing about sort of as he progressed later in his life, he did get awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He had a number of honors recognizing sort of his contributions to American society. So it's nice to see some of those wrongs righted later in his life, and he was able to enjoy that. One thing that I love.
And it's also. Oh, go ahead. I'll go after.
I was just going to say one thing I love about Ohio State, just to kind of close the loop on all that. They have such a storied history with Heisman winners and All-Americans and so forth, but they're most proud of Jesse Owens, and I think that's a pretty amazing thing for a university like Ohio State, where track isn't something that always immediately comes to mind with that university.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really great about the Jesse Owens story is the friendship that he had developed with Lutz Long during the Olympics, who was the German long jumper, who was sort of the poster boy of everything that Adolf Hitler was trying to promote. If you ever see a picture of Lutz Long, he's tall, blonde, like perfectly built. Like, he's the guy that you're going to put on the poster. And he was not really a proponent of everything that was happening, but he's somebody that's caught up in that world that he is grown up in, and what's a guy to do. And he became really good. He became friends with Jesse Owens, and he had said, they're going to keep fouling you if you're close to the board, even if you're not over it on the long jump. He's like, you can jump far enough to qualify by going off behind the board. Like, adjust your step and make it to the final. And he did. And the two of them became friends for the rest of their life. Unfortunately, Lutz Long was cut short. He was drafted into the army. He was killed in Sicily. But Jesse Owens continued to be friends with his son and kind of became like a father figure to his son. So, even somebody that's sort of trapped in the midst of something as awful as Nazi Germany, there are still people that find a way to maintain their humanity. And that's the lesson of Lutz Long. And that's the lesson of Jesse Owens, to not immediately turn his head and say, I'm going to treat you as an individual in the same way that I expect you to treat me as an individual. And that moment of humanity is something we need more of, and can learn a lot from the goings on of the 1936 Olympics, that even in the midst of the worst, one can find salvation and restitute.
Yeah, well said. Well, I want to talk about one more history post. I don't think I can top what you just sort of concluded with on Jesse Owens, but I want to talk about racing. We talked about Dan Weldon, and actually we also talked about Danica Patrick, although the post was more about Dan Weldon. But on May 29th in 2005, Dan Weldon won his first of two Indianapolis 500 races. The race is always known for, maybe remembered better for Danica Patrick, who became the first female driver to lead a lap at the Indy 500, which she actually led 3 separate times for a total of 19 laps. She would later become the second female driver that season to win the Rookie of the Year award. And even more history, was the first for team owner Michael Andretti, breaking the so-called Andretti curse. Sadly, we did lose Weldon in a crash in 2011 at the IZOD IndyCar World Championship in Vegas. But Weldon and Danica Patrick in that race, some historical moments, and both had, I think, high expectations in their career. And how do you feel that the sort of trajectory of their careers went?
Well, certainly for Dan Weldon, it was well on its way to him being a major force in IndyCar. And this was a really exciting race, the way that it panned out, because the beginning part of this race was Sam Hornish and Tony Kanaan, who was on the pole. And the two of them were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until Sam Hornish found himself in a wall, and there were a series of 1 and 2 car crashes there at Indy that really kind of reset the field. And Danica Patrick made a pretty good tactical decision when everyone else was coming in for new tires and new and fuel. Her team kept her out because they wanted her to get to the front so that she could lead laps. Even though they knew that she was going to have to pay for that later by coming in, they knew if they stayed out on the caution, she's going to get history. She's going to get to lead laps. This is going to be good for our sponsors. This is going to be great for her. This is going to be great for the sport. So they took a gamble and kept her out. Well, the way that the crashes and the yellows fell, because of her decision to stay out, she was able to work her way back to the front of the field by the end of the race. It ended up being a great strategy move because sometimes the yellows dictate whether or not your pit strategy works out. You might think you have everything in hand, and then the yellow falls wrong on the pit, and you go from first to 18th, or you go from 18th to first. And it went perfectly for her. And she, very much like this past Indy 500, was on the wrong side of the lead when it came to the restart. And Dan Weldon was able to jump her and pass her car. But what a great, fun race for both of them. And Dan Weldon won again at Indy in 2011. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the win at Indy in 2011 is what contributed to his death in Las Vegas. And it was a really awful moment for racing. It has had some positive effects moving forward with car safety and innovation, but an absolutely terrible day in racing the day that he passed away here in Vegas. But looking back at this 2005 race with Reggie Miller, by the way, waving the green flag, was a great race and the start of what was going to be an exciting time for Danica Patrick, even though she didn't have a tremendous amount of success on the track. She had a whole lot of success off the track.
Right. And I think for Weldon, he won in 2005, and then he won the 24 Hours of Daytona Victory in 2006. And his career kind of dipped, and then it had a resurgence as they got closer to 2011. And as he mentioned, unfortunately, that sort of uptick in his career also contributed to his death. And then Danica Patrick was, she sort of had a nice momentum going, and she stepped away in 2017 and then briefly came back in 2018, and she had the Danica double, where she won, the Daytona 500 and Indianapolis 500 right there to close out her career. And exciting moment, a nice high point to end her career on.
Yeah, it was a good high point, and she has done a remarkable job at marketing herself, and IndyCar has done a great job of using her appeal in order to promote the sport. And she's in a really unique position to be able to do a whole lot of things with the limited success on the track that some of the other drivers have benefited from, even with more success. Like if you look at somebody like Alex Palou, who's leading IndyCar series right now, he's won more championships than Danica Patrick won individual races. But if you're going to go and have somebody sell your motor oil, you're getting Danica Patrick. You're not getting Alex Palou. Right. Like she's done a really great job of people still, even though she's been out since 2018, people still think of IndyCar, and one of the first people they think of is Danica Patrick.
Yeah, and I think that was always sort of the cynical fans were saying, well, she's not that good. I don't see why she's promoted so much. But there's, factors outside of the track that really, it's in the benefit of racing to promote her, right? Mm-hmm. To bring in a whole new set of fans and someone who can be, who has that charisma to be a spokesperson for the sport. So you're right. I think she's, kind of has that right sort of, intangibles that really allow them to grow the sport around her.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, she's, I was really looking for her. I really liked her because she cared a lot about the racing. It wasn't all makeup commercials and bikini shoots with her. She did all of that, but that wasn't all of it for her. It was a part of it. the means to an end for her. And she, like I said, she made the most of it when it happened, but she also was pretty tough on the track. And she also, what I think was really nice about her is she got people to remember Lynn St. James and Janet Guthrie, who came before her, and even Sarah Fisher, who had run a couple of years before. It didn't have near the success that Lynn St. James and Danica Patrick did, but it was nice to be able to promote what those ladies had done in motorsports prior to the arrival of Danica Patrick.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think she sort of made racing the priority, and all these other peripheral things were secondary, but obviously she's going to take advantage of that marketing because sponsorships is such a big deal in racing.
Oh, for sure.
So you kind of need that. But yeah, you're right. She put the sport ahead of everything else, and so I appreciate that about her.
And she's no different than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's made way more money off the court than he did on, and that's with Danica Patrick. She made way more money off the court, and she didn't really do anything she didn't want to do.
Right.
So,
exactly.
More power to you.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there, Clayton. As always, thanks for joining me. I always love hearing your perspective on history, especially this time on Dale Murphy.
He's my guy.
Appreciate your passion around that.
We'll get that song up.
We're gonna post the song, the country song. But for everyone out there, follow us at Sports and Leisure on Facebook, on Substack, on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube page, share our content, and comment on our content, because we sometimes get comments and we like to talk about them here because we love hearing what fans have to say, the nostalgia that comes with that. And as much as we love talking about history, we love sharing it even more. All right, we'll see you next time, Clayton.
See you next time.